sad tale that has echoes even today. The story of Robert Bungay, is that his name?
That's
Bungay.
correct, yeah.
And his son. Tell me about how you uncovered this story, because I want you to insert yourself into the story, I'm afraid, Jack.
Well, right,
it's a lovely tale.
Okay, well, I discovered it with a tiny little inch-tall mention in a newspaper from 1943 that said that Robert Bungay, RAF, Distinguished Flying Cross for his services in England, committed suicide last night on the beach at Brighton, shot himself and his 1-year-old son through the head.
This is Brighton, Adelaide, is it?
And I thought, good grief, what's that about? So the more I got into it, I discovered that Robert Bungay, who had been born in Adelaide, signed up for flight training down there, and at the start of the war went over to England. Flew in the Battle of Britain, one of the few Australians to do that. Commandeered or commanded a squadron of Australian flyers in the RAF who were distinguished themselves during the war over England and over Europe. And then met a girl in London while he was on leave, married her. She became pregnant. He told her to get the hell out of the Blitz and go back and live with her parents live with his parents in Adelaide, which she did.
So she got on a boat then and went to Australia.
Yeah, she came to Australia, and he said, "I'll meet you when my war is done over here." He got released from the RAF and came home 2 weeks after he arrived home. She died.
She'd given birth to their
son, yeah, who by that stage was 1 year old, and she died.
How did she die?
Of meningitis. They called it the traveller's disease back then, so they assumed that she picked it up on the way there. Perfectly healthy 24-year-old woman, and Robert, who'd been through all the horrors of war, had seen some incredibly ghastly things, just couldn't cope with this. And for weeks he sort of wandered like a zombie, refusing to take any help from anyone. And one night, for reasons that really only he will know, he wheeled his young boy Richard down to the beach at Brighton, pulled out his service pistol, shot Richard through the head, and then turned the gun on himself. Now, I was midway through writing this story when suddenly I just happened across another newspaper article that mentioned that Richard had survived.
How old was he?
He was 1 when he was shot. So then
Sorry, how had he survived?
I didn't know this. It just mentioned that he had survived. So I did what any journalist would do and got the phone book and started ringing up the Bungays in Adelaide. And finally, Richard Bungay answered the phone. He's still alive today. His memory comes and goes. He limps a little, but he's a lovely man. He loves his father, builds all the planes that he flew in little models, never misses an event in his father's name. In the Canberra War Memorial, the very Spitfire that his father flew over England is hanging on display. And
what did he say when you called him?
Well, he seemed a bit surprised that anyone was interested. Yeah, and this is the amazing thing.
He must be in his
60s, yeah.
60s now, and right out of the blue.
Yeah.
This has happened.
And he lives in the same house that his father and what his father grew up in fact.
How had he survived that shot in the head?
It was a miracle. The bullet just went through his brain and did minimal damage. And hanging there in the war memorial is his father's Spitfire. And he said to me, I'd really love to, before I die, sit in that Spitfire and sit in the seat that my father sat in. He does all this stuff he said to me, I think I just do all these things to be close to my dad. It's just the most amazing father-son story in the end that began as a war story that interested me vicariously. And it was just the most touching thing I've ever worked on.
He'd have no memory, of course, of his father shooting him.
No, and for a long time he didn't know the details of what had happened. But eventually, as he became an adult, he started sifting for answers and found this out. Now, the amazing thing is a lot of people, I suppose, would react, in his position, would react badly to that. But, he's totally forgiving of his father. And, war did something to him that we'll never know is pretty much the way he looks at it.
War and grief.
Yeah.
War and grief could undo the very best of us there.
And these were extraordinary times. Going through those old newspapers, I found suicide was a very popular form of dispatch. And you've got to remember, there was no such thing as counselling or therapy back then. So these people have been thrown into the most extraordinary circumstance, a world war where they're sent to kill people and watch friends be slaughtered in front. And then they come back home and they've got to get on with life.